All right, I think we're live. So welcome to the Week 6 Google Hangout for Introduction to Learning Technologies. So this week we're talking about using synchronous video, things like Skype and Google Hangouts within the classroom or for professional development purposes, something around education. We've got a guest, which is Alan Stange, and Heather is here with me as well. And again, I'm Ryan, if you're not sure. Just a reminder that you can ask questions on the discussion forum within Canvas during this talk, or you can tweet in questions to hashtag ILT_USask or hashtag ILT_USask. All right, so right off the start here, I'll just hand it over to Alan and have him tell us a little bit about himself so we know who we're talking with. So welcome.
Thank you. My name's Alan Stange. I am a teacher in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and at the moment and for some years now I've been teaching either single grades or combinations of grade 4, 5, and 6. This year I have a grade 4 and 5 room. Within that, the school I'm in, I as best as I can, I try to integrate technology into a studio classroom design given the facilities that I have available to me. Skype has played a role in my classroom, but I think I would freely admit that networking through Skype or Hangouts has not, I haven't achieved the goals that I would set for that. And I think that the potential for using Skype in the classroom is underutilized by myself and probably everyone else, except for a few shining examples around the globe. Shall I go on? I think that
Sure.
yeah, okay. I think that the principal problem, folks, with our use of Skype, as I've seen it in classrooms and tweeted around the internet, is that far too often we use it as a mass media device. We will bring two classrooms of about 25 to 27 students together for a brief mystery Skype or demonstration or conference. And you have a lot of initial excitement in approaching bringing classrooms together through Skype that way. But it's not as effective as what we should be doing with these technologies, this technology, or whether it be Hangouts or Skype. I freely admit it hasn't been as successful as I would like it to be. But in my years working with Skype, my most successful and satisfying projects have been to utilize it to bring students who are sick at home into the classroom so that they can observe and participate. I've had students on vacation who have connected in through Skype to find out what they're missing, and I've had small group conversations, you know, two or three students at my end with 2 or 3 students at another end in another school, where you get a lot more involvement. It's more authentic learning taking place than the excitement of a mystery Skype or introduction between 2 classrooms, and as I have frequently done between mostly American classrooms, there's a time problem with these technologies. But when I have been able to get that one-to-one Skyping going in the classroom, when I've been able to get small groups of students to do literature circles, then I'm really satisfied with the result. 27 kids in one room and 27 kids in the other room probably translates into about 5 kids on either end actively involved in conversation and attending to it, and other people who are increasingly bored with their lack of involvement or their time on the time at the screen. I guess I would have to say I had one really successful author visit with my class, and find it difficult to tap into that sort of opportunity. So it's interesting for me to hear of all of the successful connections people have made with their classrooms, and to wonder about the backstory of trying to make those connections and how they were achieved. That's what I think where I'll start with.
All right. Well, you covered a lot of different things there. Heather, is there any questions that kind of jumped out at you from that?
Can you explain more about what a mystery Skype is?
A mystery Skype is actually rather a formalized process. I wish I could just throw up a link here to the best example of that. That I'm on an iPad, so my connections are limited at the moment. There have been a number of people who've have provided a lot of good scaffolds, resources for organizing a mystery Skype. Essentially what happens is you find a classroom somewhere, and what you do is you play a game of 20 or more questions with the classroom to try to identify where that classroom is in the world, by asking yes or no questions, like, are you in North America? Do you live by a river? And so forth. Is there winter there? Those kinds of questions. You can't ask what town do you live in, because it's a yes or no question. And what you do is you have certain, the best organized of these is you have your class broken down.
Oh, we're having some
problems.
Issues.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get Alan back soon. Right now he seems to be frozen. Ryan, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier about how, and Alan brought this up about the author coming in, that when I taught an undergrad course in education, I had used Will Richardson's book on blogs, wikis, and podcasts as a text for that course. And Will was great because he actually came in on a Google Hangout, but we could have done it with Skype, and talked to my class and answered their questions. And he was far more knowledgeable about some of these things than I was, which was fabulous. So even bringing in a textbook author, or in many cases it's a novelist that people can bring in if their class is reading a novel and the author's still alive, then that would work. I think we have Alan back now, it looks like.
Looks like it.
Welcome back, Alan.
Thank you.
All right, so you were just kind of talking about the process, the mystery Skype, and I think you said there's the yes or no questions. I think maybe you're going to talk about a little bit more about technically how it works within the classroom.
Well, within the classroom, you break the groups, your classroom down into task groups. Some research, others compose questions, and the media stars ask the questions. And also another group considers answers to the questions given. It doesn't always work well. You'd have to do it quite often before your class, I think, would get into a routine. When questions are asked by the other class, everyone wants to shout out an answer, for example. They want to be involved. It's good, and mystery Skype can take between half an hour and an hour, depending upon how good your class is at guessing the location of the other class. It's an exciting sort of thing. If done right, it would be a great way to introduce kids to geography and culture. A lot of times it's taken a little, like my experience is it's generally been out of the context of what we're studying. It would be nice to do a mystery Skype with a school that you're studying the region of. And there are vehicles to connect with other schools, either through Twitter, Skype in the classroom, organizes this as well.
And so when you've organized these, what method have you taken? Have you just gone on Twitter, or have you used Skype in the classroom?
Both, and even other networks like Google+. I find for some reason that putting out a call on Twitter has been working better for me at the moment. Can't say why. You would think that going to the Skype in the Classroom site and introducing yourself and offering a project with the other teachers would work, and for some people would swear by it, but for me it hasn't been as successful as I would like.
Okay.
Skype in the Classroom, it should be explored as a vehicle for connecting with other teachers.
Okay. So actually, when you were offline there, Heather was talking a little bit about when she brought in the author of the textbook that she was using in education class a couple of years ago. And so Heather, just wanted to jump back to that. How did you make that connection with Will Richardson to bring him into the class?
Well, thankfully, I mean, when we're talking about Will Richardson, he has a heavy online presence, and so I think it started with me just asking him on Twitter, and you know, he could have said no, and I've had people that I've sent requests out to and I get no response, but Will just responded, yeah, let's talk about it some more. Let's talk about when and the details of that, and it worked really well. We actually had some technical issues where during the recording we couldn't see him, we could hear him, but then when the final video was done, there he was.
Okay.
It was fine. And I gave some students, these are undergraduate students, so they're all adults, but I gave them the choice of where I set the camera up. If you want to be seen, sit here, and if you don't want to be seen, sit on this side of the room. And that was the way the room was set up. But anybody could ask him questions. And I gave them a heads up on who was coming in, and they had a few questions ready, and I gave him an idea of what we were doing in the course, and we went from there.
Okay, and you found that it worked pretty well?
Yeah, I found it worked quite well. It seems like a natural way to bring in speakers that you normally couldn't get them to physically arrive in your class.
Yeah, yes, and students are very excited to meet them. In the case of my author, and I've only done it once, it was a really successful conversation between the author and the students. They really delighted in being able to ask questions, and the author on his side really delighted in being able to see some readers. Well, another Skype project that I recall doing way back, it's a number of years now, is I connected with the school in Missouri. We were doing Skype calls between 3 schools in Missouri and ourselves. By the way, we find the multiple classrooms connections broke down with our bandwidth, I guess, at that time. You couldn't get 2 or 3 classrooms talking to each other simultaneously very well.
Okay.
One-to-one is best. But in that case, they had a museum in their Missouri River city, and they arranged a virtual tour using Skype. They walked around the museum for our class, and so that was another application I've done with Skype as well, now that I think about it. That had technical issues itself, but it was actually remarkably successful, and with so many venues now having Wi-Fi in their buildings, or for that matter, people with phones and unlimited data, you can do a variety of virtual tours with your iPhone when you're away. Yep. So there's a lot of opportunities.
Yep. I was mentioning, we were talking a little bit about this before we started, about if you're in if you're in Introduction to Learning Technologies or have been following these Hangouts, then you know that last week we spoke with John Boyer from Virginia Tech, and John caught my attention initially when I saw an article about how he had used Skype to bring in the recently released from house arrest opposition leader from Myanmar. And
Impressive.
yeah, and what happened is he teaches a class of almost 3,000 students, and they did a YouTube video of the entire class basically saying, please come speak to us. And she ended up seeing the video and said, okay. And they brought her in for an hour, and students were picked, I think, ahead of time and got to come up and ask questions, but the whole thing was up on a screen where everybody in class could see it. And they recorded the entire thing, so now anybody can go watch it on YouTube. But he does that to bring in world leaders. And so, I mean, book authors, politicians, whoever. I think it was, wasn't there a class that brought in Mark Hatfield?
Chris Hatfield. Yeah.
Chris Hatfield, thank you. Chris Hatfield from the space station into their class. Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. We do have some questions on the discussion board. So I'm going to pull up one. This one's from Susan. And she said, hi, Alan. Do you have any experience of working with disabled users? And if so, which synchronous video tool would you say was the most accessible? This might be from the point of view of a user with hearing or vision impairments, with motor impairments, or with dyslexia, etc. And thank you.
No, I don't, but I could imagine that a conference software package like Skype would facilitate students with hearing impairment or visual impairment quite nicely. That's something that maybe we all need to explore a little bit more. I haven't had students. I have a student with hearing impairment at the moment, but not severe, and so I haven't needed to problem solve that one yet.
This actually reminds me, Heather, a couple of years ago when we hosted that TLT conference, and there was it was synchronous audio being used, sent to a service somewhere that was captioning the presentations for someone in the audience, right? Is that how it was working?
That sounds familiar.
Yes, that's just kind of an interesting kind of take on that question of basically the person was sitting in the room live watching the presentations, and I think her computer was probably sending the audio feed to, I think it was going to Calgary or something like that, and then somebody there was typing out basically captions of the presentations for her. So that's kind of a really interesting way of using a tool like this.
Yeah, we have some powerful tools available to us, but I think the question in my response highlights the fact that we haven't integrated these tools well into our classrooms. A teacher who had a blind student would probably be far more knowledgeable about this than I, and I don't think that that's such a great thing. I would like to think that we all had a background knowledge on how to access these tools and how to use them in our classrooms. So,
yeah.
So in your introduction there, Alan, you talked about how sometimes students that are sick at home will use this to connect, or students that are on vacation. I'm just wondering, in your experience, how much has that happened? Is that something that's happening more and more frequently, or?
It's interesting. I'd like to be able to give you an authoritative answer to that. It kind of was, your question leads into a thought that I was wanting to share. I've only done it, like, if, you know, 1 in 20 students will attempt it during the course of an illness or a vacation. And it kind of gets me because I run a BYOD classroom. My school division has a very robust BYOD network for the students that they can log into. And in my classroom of 4-5s, and right now I have 24 kids, I would say that on average 7 bring basically an iPod or an iPad to the classroom every day. And as you might expect, there's a tendency to use them as gaming devices, but they social network on them too. They're quite young, so they don't have an opportunity to go on Facebook. Most of them, their parents don't allow that, but they do FaceTime with each other, and they a lot, and they certainly message. And it's clear to me, even before that, when I first introduced Skype 4 or 5 years ago in my classroom to my students, I had students who would Skype me from home just to chat. They were so excited by the possibility of doing that. Well, that particular student also brought in a Ning group for himself. But anyway, they are constantly in connection with each other. And the trick for us is to get them to see these tools that they use on a social basis as learning tools. And I will hear from students that they Skyped with somebody or messaged with somebody about the day's events at school when somebody was absent. They keep me up to date on the kids who are absent. That kind of thing is going ahead. There's a back channel nowadays. I mean, here in my suburban upper middle class neighborhood school, you know, where you are and who your students are matters in this situation. They back channel my classroom, not always for learning purposes, but they do. And the trick is to try to build on that. I mean, like the day a student will come to me and say, I talked to my favorite author on Skype.
Nice.
Or FaceTime. That's going to be the good time. That's going to be when they're all familiar with the potential of these devices. It's getting them to be motivated to use them in those ways, I think.
Well, I know personally that we use Skype at home to connect with family so that we can talk, like my daughter can talk to her grandparents and so forth. And I think that's actually becoming more and more common, that people are using FaceTime and Skype and so forth to connect with family and friends that are dispersed. And because of that, the kids, I think, are becoming more used to that. But again, it depends on the population. So where do you live and who are your students, as opposed to just any community. But I do think we're seeing a lot more of that, especially since you can do it on a phone.
Yeah, this speaks to the connectedness of learning. We know that learning is connected, but somehow or other we limit the channels of connection in school. Too often classrooms want to be connected, but in a very narrow way, student to teacher, teacher back to student, and some teachers, God bless them, still limit connections within the classroom of students talking to each other and learning from each other, panicking as the noise level increases, and all the rest of that. And so, for them, a device must be social, because how could it be for schooling? They don't see that in their minds. It's not a natural thing. In the last few years, and again, teachers block this sort of connection. In the last few years, I've freely given out my cell phone number to families so they can contact me. And I have a very robust conversation going on with about 7 or 8 of the parents in my classroom. We can connect daily. Okay, this sounds pretty punitive, but I mean, like, if I ask a student to leave the room, I'll text their parent and say, Johnny had to leave the room, got a little too excited, couldn't stop talking. They don't like that, but on the other hand, I also snap off pictures during the course of the day, a successful moment for somebody, and pass that on to the parents as well. So that now everyone's walking around with phones in their pockets, parents anyway, even in, I think, in our, at least in North America, in Canada here. And we're gradually getting to see that that's a possibility to maintain those kinds of close connections and not to feel threatened by somebody's intrusion into your private life, or just, yeah. And I think that eventually we'll see networking things like Hangouts and Skype becoming more mainstream in people's consciousness as a way of communicating.
Yeah. We have another question on the board from Oksana. And is a group call a free feature on Skype? And have you been able to use Skype in the classroom feature? It's my understanding that if you want to call multiple people into it, you need a pro account, right?
That's an interesting question I don't know the answer to. For some reason, I have done this, but I didn't initiate the call with multiple users. Mm-hmm. So I may have just been participating in someone else's pro account. That was a few years ago. I don't think, perhaps bandwidth issues have resolved themselves in the meantime. But I think what you're getting is an exponential growth in the problems involved with Skyping classroom to classroom. Instead of having 50 people trying to be engaged in a conversation, now you have 7,500 people. And that becomes more of a broadcast from one school to another, which is the only successful way I've seen it is that. I think at that point in time, you might as well Ustream it or use a different vehicle if you're going to try to connect one classroom to 3 or 4 classrooms, or YouTube it. But I don't know the answer to that question. That's an interesting one.
I just jumped over to the Skype website, and they still have a premium section on their website, but it says, now that group video calls are free for everyone, we've removed premium to give it a refresh. So basically, it used to be a pay feature, but now it's not.
I think I would only want to attempt it now if I could have a group of 6 students, 2 in each location,
right,
chatting with each other.
The use I could see for it would actually be not bringing multiple classrooms together, but maybe one classroom and 2 guests. Or more. So but I can see what you mean by having multiple full classrooms trying to talk to each other. That would probably be a little crazy.
I run 3. I have 4 Skype accounts. I have my personal family one, which is of course I use to talk to my children and grandchildren, and I have a classroom Skype account and 2 additional ones. So occasionally what I can do is with another classroom we can set up groups of students in different parts of the school talking to each other. That's another factor I think we need to really remember in Skyping is you have to have a controlled environment for the kids. Our school is overflowing. We have no spare rooms. The hallways are busy with activities, people coming and going in small groups working in the hallways. It's very difficult to find 2 or 3 places where kids can settle down and have a quiet conversation, because the sound quality on Skype is not ideal unless you're in a situation like a classroom where we have speakers built into the ceiling and we can jack up the volume considerably. Microphones are a problem with laptops or iPads. Since we have iPads, a lot of my Skyping was pre-iPads, so we used laptops. Now with iPads, oh my God, why couldn't we do this all the time?
We did get a question on Twitter from Linda, and she asked, is it appropriate for kids and teachers to be Skyping outside the school day?
I no longer do it because I'm kind of off Facebook to begin with. I just keep a minimal presence there now personally. But at the time when I was more active, sometimes students would connect with me on Facebook. Students will follow me on Twitter, and invite me to follow them on Twitter. I have Skyped with students at home, and I think that the answer to that question is yes, if you remember to maintain a professional relationship. You're not their friend, and any conversation that you have ought to be strictly related to the curriculum and learning in your classroom. If a student Skypes me, I'm not really interested in having a general chat or conversation with them. What I would be interested in is hearing their problem about, I don't do homework, but they sometimes think about what I do, what we do in school, after school. Or right now they're working on Heritage Fair projects, for example, and it's, even though it's all supposed to be done in school, inevitably things go home. So having conversations on that nature is good. My class is connected to Edmodo, so that's as close as they get to Facebook. Edmodo is a closed Facebook-like environment for students, and I heartily recommend it. I'm involved in global pen pal projects with classrooms outside of Canada. The kids love it. It's a great learning tool and writing tool, and they also talk to me on this channel as well. I think it's appropriate. I think that I spent most of my career teaching in, or half of my career teaching in small rural schools in Saskatchewan, and the kind of school which has 120 students, and in a small rural village. You don't get away from students. Students are there in your life. But if you remind yourself that social networking is like bumping into your students at a supermarket or at the mall, it's got to be that even though you may think it's private, it's not. It's a public place. And so because it's a public place, you have to be a responsible adult with your children. It's the same way with emailing. My students at Prairie South Schools, to be registered at Prairie South Schools and to have access to the network provides you with an email account from kindergarten till grade 12. And that means that students can email a teacher as easily as pick up a phone and call them. But there's a certain amount of monitoring on that system. But no, I think it's appropriate. I think we need to. I think we need to remember who we are in relation to our students, and to not present undue barriers. Student phones me up in the evening, and I'm watching television with my wife. I'll just tell them quite frankly, it's not appropriate right now. I'm busy. Family time. That doesn't happen very often. Hasn't happened in years. They have a sense of the propriety, and most of them don't really want to talk to me outside of school.
Yep. Just a quick reminder that if you want to tweet us a question, the hashtag is ILT_USask, USASK. Ryan, I think there was a question on the discussion forum that came in, right?
I don't know, but I've got some things that I want to dig into a bit.
I do see there is another question from Tim that we can get to as soon as you're done with your question.
Okay, I was just going back to the thing I asked about the kids that are, say sick at home. When they have come in, have you just brought them in to chat with you directly, or have you actually tried to do a thing where there's like a student set up on a desk as a student that's not there, or how have you kind of gone about doing that?
I see. Both, all. There's been times when I just took my webcam from my teacher's desk station and aimed it at the classroom so they could see what was going on. And then I would station a student at that computer so that they could catch the responses for the class. I have done that, and I'm not. That's like auditing the class mostly. They don't feel like participating all that much. I'd love to say that worked great, and I think it's just one of those things that should become integrated into the whole process of it. There's never yet been a student who buggered off to Mexico at this time of year and whose parents didn't say, can we take some work with us? Can we do anything? Says, are you bringing a device along? Yes. Will there be Wi-Fi at your hotel? And there always is. Yes. Well, why don't you have them connect with the class? They don't. They're there to do other things. So I guess doesn't happen very often. I still think that the most effective ones is when I have students who are sick at home and they want to keep up with the class, and I can post an activity or a copy of whatever it is that they need to be working on to a mutual site which they can get at. Usually I use a Google Drive. My class has a classroom Google Drive, and we put everything in there. And just park a student at the computer, one or two students at the computer with that student at home, and they work through the assignment together as a small group. I think that's a more effective way. We're broadcasting out to an unknown quantity of people here in this broadcast with the Hangouts, but there's just three of us talking together. Mm-hmm. And I think that we could have added a fourth or a fifth, but I think that this makes it a more effective scale for conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just the main thing I kind of pulled out of that is kind of the importance of having those students that are connecting directly with that student that are at home. So it's not just, here, I'll set up the webcam in the corner and leave it, right? And as a teacher, it's pretty hard for you to monitor that, so it's kind of a good idea to have a student or two monitor that.
Yeah. Years ago, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say years ago, when I was in Central Butte, we were doing what do we call them? The broadcast classes from SCN. They broadcast French classes and entrepreneurship classes, that sort of thing. Yeah. Psychology class, law class. That was one way. Oh my goodness, it's not very good. The students in the classroom are not honestly attending to what's happening on the screen. You have a few people who have bought into the delivery method and even are willing to reach for a telephone and phone in a question to the teacher. Very unsatisfactory. And the problem with the Skype or Hangouts is if you don't build in conversation and feedback into your approach, you'll lose the audience.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, going to our audience, Heather, we've got that question. You want to read it from Tim?
Yeah, this question is from Tim, and he said, you mentioned small group conversation approaches, so 2 to 3 students on each end, like literature circles, as facilitating more authentic learning and involvement than mass media uses like Mystery Skype. Could you tell us a bit more about how you've set up those smaller scale conversations? For example, have these been ongoing conversations?
Unfortunately, no. We've been able to connect groups, or I have been able to connect groups for single sessions of half an hour or so in length. And clearly, it would be fun to try a project approach where students reconnected with each other over a period of time and built up something of a relationship with each other. Probably in conjunction with a social network group like Edmodo, where they could do conversations with each other augmented by the face-to-face encounters. And I haven't been able to do that. But now that you say it, I'm thinking about my classroom in Texas and my classroom in Illinois and why I don't have little Skype sessions with those kids. And I think I need to follow that up and get some things working on that for the rest of this year. It's a good point. Ideally, we want an untethered classroom where students working with other kids do it for sustained periods of time, not just brief introductions to each other.
Mm-hmm. Linda asked a follow-up question earlier. She had asked about contact between kids and teachers on Skype outside of school time, and you were talking about how they have your cell phone number, and yes, you've connected with them outside of the normal hours. And she asked, does that set them up to have poor work-life balance later on because you're modeling that you're always doing your job?
Probably. Probably. I'm on holiday and I'm talking with you guys.
Yeah.
So I guess perhaps it does. I think that what it may also do is to establish some experience in which to build judgment on social networking of one sort or another. My wife would be glad to run into the screen here right now and tell you that I spend way too much time on social networks and not enough time in real life with people, and she would be right. And what has happened over the years is, like, for example, I said I cut back on Facebook and Instagram. What's happened over the years is I was a fiend with my phone and Twitter. I was tweeting all the time. I was tweeting about inane moments in my life, and building up a following and building up people I followed. And what happened is that I saturated myself, and I learned I had to cut back. I had to balance that. Like, I've had conversations with distraught parents in the supermarket in the evening. They needed to talk to me, and they had to talk, and this was important for them, and I didn't have a way of it just wasn't in me to say, sorry, I'm in the supermarket here picking out vegetables here, you have to phone me at school. I just walked away from my wife for a bit, looked for a quiet place, and had a conversation with the person. But if it ever became too much, you just have to learn how to say no. And I think that the kids, yes, but are we setting kids up for that kind of thing? Perhaps. I think, though, that the technology changes our culture. I was reading, like with cell phones in our pockets, we are no longer patient when somebody doesn't answer the phone. And what we need to do is to relearn that patience. We need to learn that sometimes people aren't going to answer us. I think it'll be okay. I'm optimistic.
Tim actually made a follow-up comment. I just wanted to read you. They said that Google Drive enabled collaboration with a couple of students working through assignments with a student sick at home is a great idea. So I think that was a thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I just wish it worked more effectively than it has. I mean, children at home are a lot like everyone else who gets a day off. They're not super anxious to spend that bonus time that they've established by being sick connecting with school. They'd rather spend it doing other things. And I think you're up against that sort of thing as well.
So just kind of wondering, in your experience when you have students in smaller groups using Skype over Wi-Fi, do you find that it worked fairly well with the Wi-Fi connections that you have in your school?
Yeah, I've never done more than 3 groups working on laptops, and our bandwidth seems to have been okay. Somebody might say, well, so how's it going? I mean, like, you've got 3 groups in different rooms, and you're wandering back and forth between them and your regular classroom to see that everyone's on task. Well, you lose them from sometimes. Things don't always work. But as far as the connection itself, the technology, the hardware, that's been pretty successful in my experience.
Good to know, because that's, sometimes a limiting factor that some people see it as.
Well, the fleshware sometimes fails.
Yeah. I was wondering, you had mentioned that with that one Missouri school you did a field trip. Have you ever done any other virtual field trips with your students?
No. It takes a lot of work for the person at that end to set up. I've often felt like our public institutions, the national museums particularly, should just automatically have programs. I mean, like, they've got people who you can book to come in and see the place. Why don't they have people who are walking around with the equipment to do a virtual tour? It's unbelievably simple nowadays. I mean, like, just yesterday I was dealing with a a condo situation, and I pulled out my phone and then walked around the condo talking to my brother-in-law and sister-in-law just to show them. I did a little virtual tour of that. Why couldn't they have a whole network established that you could book times in with the museum and do that? But it does take planning, it does take thinking, and it takes hardware, you know. And so that's probably why it hasn't happened very often. There is also this, you know, we have time issues. We have to be within a certain range of time zones to make it effective. We had a Skype call planned with our global pen pals in Australia, but in order to pull that off, I had to ask students to come in the evening. And they came in the evening with their parents to do the Skype call. And it was very disappointing because the Skype call didn't happen. There was technical difficulties, I guess, at that particular point in time. But the Australians had to come at a wonky time, and we had to come at a wonky time in order to meet each other halfway. Easy to do it in North America, or easier.
There's actually I think it's powered by Google, but I'm not sure. There's a website at the bottom that says powered by Google. I'll share the link right now. It's connectedclassrooms.withgoogle.com that I came across, and I haven't explored it much myself, but it looked like a fair amount of work is being put in to try and get these kind of live field trips going, and something that you might want to check out. I'll share that on Twitter now. Heather, do you have any more questions regarding Skype or Hangouts or anything like that?
I can't think of anything offhand. We've had some really good ones come in already, and some good conversation about this. I guess because you teach elementary school, you teach everything.
Yes, pretty much.
Right. So, is there somebody that you wish you could bring in as an expert in something that you cover in your class that you haven't been able to reach, you haven't been able to make that connection, or it's just sort of sitting there up on the wish list?
Oh, I've got a great wish list one, which is for some reason we've failed to connect. I can't remember her name. How terrible. There is an educator out in British Columbia who has produced a whole range of health YouTube videos. And she's very engaging. In the fall, my students were watching a health video from her, and they were actually raising their hands, wanting to ask her questions. And all they were doing was watching a YouTube video. So I contacted her and through Google Plus, and told her about this and said that it would be wonderful if we could have a Skype call together. And she was really enthusiastic about it, but we haven't been able to put it together. I just noticed the reminder of it recently, so I'm going to try to pursue that again. They thought she was just the greatest, that's you know, you'd love to talk with Chris Hadfield, you'd love to talk with Robert Munch, and get them to Skype in with your class. Science experts. I think this is a field we need to explore. We need more and more people willing to talk, and who can find time to do it.
I try and go with the attitude for things like this of, you know, the worst they can do is say no. So
yes,
ask.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how we booked Alan Stange for today.
Absolutely.
And there are those people out there who are willing to talk on almost any occasion.
I know that there tends to be some lag time, so I'm looking to see if there's any questions on the discussion board. There hasn't been any new ones in about 10 minutes there.
So I've got an unrelated question. So not related to Skype or Hangouts or anything like that. But Alan, I know that you're quite active on something that's like hashtag SaskEdChat, I think is the hashtag.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you'd those sorts of things are becoming more and more common, more and more popular. And I'm kind of wondering if you'd be able to share a little bit of, what that is, how that's organized, and how that kind of runs, just so people kind of know about those possibilities out there.
Well, I really have to put a plug in for Kelly Christopherson, who has organized and done the heavy lifting to get Sask Ed Chat moving. He and I and a few others began trying to do a Thursday night conversation. There's Ed Chat, there's Fifth Chat, there's any number of chat groups out there, way too many to follow. And you just have to pick the ones that you want to be participating in and dedicate yourself to them, I think. It's like PD opportunities in general. You can't go to them all. So a few years ago, we started a Sask Ed Chat and settled on this hashtag. And a Thursday night was a random choice on our part, I think. Anyway, it's now starting to grow, and it meets a need that I felt we've needed in this particular province for a long time. There's some beautiful conversations, particularly subject-oriented conversations out there. It's been my impression that because of the relative size of our populations, that a lot of us in Canada become involved in conversations that are very American school problem-oriented. And I think that those problems spill over into Canada in some ways, but we have our own unique conversation, and we need to have a venue for talking. So I heartily encourage you to come and join us at Sask Ed Chat. Conversely, the bigger the group gets, the more disjointed the conversation is going to become. But we're doing really well right now, and it has Sask Ed Chat. Kelly runs a remind message that reminds everyone to come and join us. And he's set up a Google community where we can go and continue the chat. Most recently, we're experimenting with blog challenges. I don't know what to think about blogging anymore. I've been a dedicated blogger for many years, but so much of my effort goes into responding and contributing to things like Google Plus, and a lot of that's where my energy seems to go nowadays. And then I'll write a response to somebody on Google Plus and say, "Oh, this should be my blog entry," and I'll just simply copy it and then drop it into my blog and expand on it a little bit, and there you go. So we are doing a little bit of a blogging challenge, and what we do is he has it set up so that he sends out tweets and comments in a post on Google Plus to allow people in the Saskatchewan community. And we get people from outside the Saskatchewan community, but people within the Saskatchewan community can suggest topics for each week, and so it's actually becoming quite a dynamic conversation. I'm pleased that it seems to be centered largely in the Regina area in my mind for some reason, but I think we're growing outwards, and I'm pleased to see a lot of pre-service teachers involving themselves in the conversation as well, and that's cool.
Yeah. So basically, the main thing is Thursday nights is about an hour long, or how long is it usually?
An hour long. We that's our norm, is to start at 8 and to end at 9. Conversations bleed over, obviously, but for days they'll continue with the hashtag SASKED chat. Follow it. We're even talking about T-shirts now.
Nice. That's
great.
great.
I think I saw that last Thursday night. I saw some tweets about T-shirts. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just something that, those kind of chats are becoming more and more popular. So I thought you're fairly involved in it, so I wanted to kind of share that idea with people in this course. So.
No, I don't. I just honestly don't believe we're networking enough. There's networking, and yet somehow or other it's not connecting all the times. After all these years, the evergreen curriculum the Saskatchewan government set up was intended to have resources from across the province contributing to the evergreen curriculum. It hasn't happened. People have set up wiki-space groups on curriculum development. They've gone to other sources to create curriculum documents, and somehow or other we haven't gelled on this. And one of the things we have not gelled is in communication and conversation around the province. So we need to keep working on that. That will be the job for the next generation.
There you go.
All right.
Excuse me.
Any final thoughts or questions, anything like that around synchronous video, things like Skype in the classroom, anything like that, or are we about done? What do you think, Heather?
I think we've got about 4 minutes left, and that's it.
Any final thoughts, Alan, that you'd like to kind of share? Or any? And you went over some tips at the start. Are there any kind of major tips that you would have regarding using Skype or something like that? When you reiterate.
Yeah, when you the three of us began, you were talking a little bit, giving me an idea of what you've done before. You were talking about a previous speaker, and I was impressed with the whole range of integration of technology that he was using. And I realized, I'm conscious of the fact that as I have spoken to the group of you today, that I too have just simply just dragged in all sorts of social networking vehicles as part of the learning process. And I think the takeaway you need to get from this is that there are, in order to be successful, you have to combine different tools together. You know, like Skype by itself would be very limited, but Skype in connection with social networking groups like Twitter or I'm talking classroom Twitter. I run a classroom Twitter account as well with some which we try to keep going. Twitter, Google Plus, groups like Edmodo, and even lots of people still use Facebook in the class for their classrooms. I think, and text messaging. I mean, like the more we wrap learning around these technologies around learning, and draw on them for their particular strengths, the better for all of us. So
Great.
You can't have a conversation about Skype without talking about everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. It's true.
That's kind of our course, right? So we've got all the different weeks, and there's not a whole lot of tools within the course that standalone would be all that useful, but used in conjunction, it becomes powerful.
Right. Find the right mix for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me to talk.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for giving up some of your holiday time to join us this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk to you later. And for everybody in Introduction to Learning Technologies, we'll see you next week. And Ryan and I will be the guests for the week, and we're going to be talking about social bookmarking and Evernote, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. All right. Great. Until then, thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, goodbye.